Little thought is given to the ancient legends of the many monsters and ogres that were an integral part of life for our long dead ancestors. If our ancestors were to witness the world as it is today, they would be so overwhelmed by the advancements of their descendants that the world would be completely alien to them. On the other hand, while our world would overwhelm them with its modern technological wonders, their primitive world and the menacing things in it may likely swallow us, literally. Take, for instance, ancient manuscripts that speak of dragons. In today's world, we'd scoff at the idea of such creatures existing, recognizing them as characters in fantasy novels and sci-fi movies, confirming that these large, often winged, fire-breathing creatures are nothing more than the creation of a good imagination from a time before the majority of the modern world enjoyed the luxury of the electric light.
One such creature is the brainchild of J.R.R. Tolkien and can be found in the spellbinding pages of his epic fantasy novel, The Hobbit. Smaug, the last great dragon of Middle-earth, protectively lavished itself over a massive hoard of gold and jewels.
Tolkien may have been deriving his material on dragons from older sources because in his manuscripts he used the term drake to also refer to these mythical creatures. The word is derived from Old English draka, meaning snake or dragon, but there is another term that may have been inferred from the same sources known as wyrm.
These creatures were the material of many legends across the British Isles, and numerous sources suggest that the term is in reference to a creature known to the likes of the earlier Celts as a giant and hideous worm.
Unlike the medieval versions that led into the modern age, the earliest accounts of dragons were of large, muscular serpents that lived in the obscurity of deep water, but could also cross land, and they would kill men and horses alike with their terrible breath. These early serpents were also associated with treasure and water, and in fact, in Ireland, they were known to have a lust for gold. In County Mayo, one such former place lies within Croagh-Patrick and was venerated in ancient times by the pagan death cult, a cult that was heavily based on serpent worship. Now, however, it is a place of pilgrimage for many of the new religion. Interestingly, this mountain contains one of Ireland's biggest gold deposits, valued at over 500 million euros. Hopefully, however, the greed of man will never be allowed to disturb the gold of the serpents. Ireland's landscapes is still littered with landmarks whose names are connected with these great creatures. Take, for instance, Loch Pesht, found on the Lonely Hill Pass in Omagh, County Tyrone, and the simplicity of its name translates into Lake of the Serpent or Worm. Pesht was an Irish name given to these large creatures and was derived from the Latin pestis, referring to something noxious and possibly harmful. The early Celtic Christians associated these great creatures as being Satan's emissary on earth.
In Old Irish, pest was the title awarded to these great creatures of old, a name very different from the Old English wyrm, although we believe it to be the same kind of creature.
A creature who for the most part seemed to traverse the landscape and waterways unnoticed. For the few that did come across them, however, the encounter was so intense it was to generate legends of great beasts that lay in wait within the depths of the waterways, waiting for its prey, which could be man, woman, child, or animal. That's if the legends are to be believed. Surely, these legends are just that. Surely, there was nothing real of its kind in this world that could have ignited the spark to create this infamous legend that would still leave its mark within the names of the country we live in.
Would it come as a shock that things are not as black and white, as we bathe in that overhead electric light?
The clues within the legendary stories place these slippery animals near or in water, and although they are often seen on land, water is always within close reach, and when under the surface, they tended to hide in deep trenches or holes where they waited for their prey. Take for example the serpent hole or the wormhole on the island of Inishmore, used by the Red Bull cliff diving competitors, and the serpent's hole found here on the River Bonnet on the Leitrim-Sligo border.
In Wales, we find another example of one of these creatures, found during the 18th century, in which a local man attempted to swim across a freshwater lake called Clinagader.
Observers on the lakeshore were horrified to see the long trailing object shadowing the swimmer. All attempts failed to alert him when suddenly the creature quickly coiled itself around him, pulling him into the water's depths, and he was never seen again.
Early texts from the 6th century highlight a chance encounter between Irish St. Columba and the now infamous Loch Ness Monster.
Being of Celtic Christian stock and a native of Ireland, a land well versed in these serpentine creatures, he forced his will against the great beast in an attempt to save a man's life as the creature rose from the River Ness that leads into the massive body of water in the loch. It has been suggested that these great creatures came from the sea to find a home in the deserted areas of the Irish landscape. Interestingly, there are smaller eels that are born in the Atlantic Ocean and travel to the western shores of Europe and up the rivers where they continue to grow. The male of the species spends a lot of time in estuaries, whereas the females spend a lot of their time in deep river pools and lakes. The darker the water, the better, it would seem, and they prefer silt-covered river and lake beds and feed closer to dusk and during the night. These creatures have also been known to travel from lake to lake across land, especially when fields may have been flooded.
Although living near humans and other animals, they could easily spend decades unnoticed. And we may never see them, but when the growing need to spawn called eel, it will begin its journey from our lands and waterways back to the ocean where they mated and died.
The largest eel is the European conger. Some estimates would place it around 8 to 10 feet, with the girth as thick as a man's leg. However, these estimates may have been taken from the male species, which tend to be shorter than the female. But even at 8 to 10 feet, this wouldn't match the stories associated with these great creatures.
To date, the largest alleged conger eel was fished off the Westman Islands in the North Atlantic and weighed in somewhere between an astounding 250 and 350 pounds. And if we consider that a 130 pound specimen can reach a length of 10 feet long, it's quite possible that this enormous fish was over 20 feet long.
Conger eels, however, don't generally migrate into fresh water. But was there a species that once did and has possibly died out since? We may never know. It is worth noting that researchers from the University of Otago in New Zealand did collect DNA from within water samples taken from Loch Ness in 2019 and found no supporting evidence to suggest the deep recesses of the loch supported previous speculated animals such as plesiosaurs, shark or catfish. But what the samples did show was a plentiful evidence of eels.
Professor Neil Gemmell said the data itself didn't reveal the size of the eel, so therefore could not discount the possibility that Nessie may indeed have been a giant eel.
This goes some way to give a possible explanation as to what our ancestors may have came across during their lifetime. The early stories mention creatures with large bulging eyes that were exceptionally territorial, that lived in the murkiness of peat-infested waters. These descriptions could easily apply to the appearance and habitats of a now extinct eel that was fished out of existence or naturally died out, we believe around the 1960s, whose last stronghold may have been the peat lakes of the west of Ireland.
So, in retrospect, the great serpents or worms of old may have had a basis in this reality. It is possible they were animals who have become lost in our history, echoes of great monsters long gone, feared and hunted by our ancestors. Or were they?
Adding the finishing touches to this short documentary, I had the pleasure to speak to a boating couple who had a very strange tale to tell. During the summer of 2012, they stood on the dock of Shannon Harbour, just outside Ballina in County Offaly. Suddenly, something rose from the water with a girth of a medium calve. Its black surface created such a wave that it severely disrupted the boats docked along the river's edge and vanished out of sight, leaving them mystified. I think the last word should be taken by R.C. Thompson in his book The Devils and Evil Spirits of Babylonia, in which an incantation is given to ward off the seemingly evil creatures. 7 are they, 7 are they, in the ocean deep, 7 are they. They are reared in their home, the ocean deep, neither male nor female are they. They are as roaming as the wind blast, no wife have they, no son do they beget. They know neither mercy nor pity, they hearken not unto prayers and supplications. They are the horses reared on the hills, the evil ones of Ea, throne bearers of the gods are they. They stand in the highway to befoul the path, evil are they, by heaven be ye exorcised.